All of this tells you why I think they're going to win. Now, let me conclude by talking about the possibility of peace agreement. Not going to be a peace agreement, meaningful peace agreement. Not going to happen. You'll get a frozen conflict. Why is there not going to be a meaningful peace agreement? Two main reasons. The first is the territory problem. The Ukrainians want their territory back. The Russians have made it clear they're not going to get their territory back. The Russians are not going to give up those 4 oblasts they annexed. They're not going to give up Crimea. And the Ukrainians insist on getting that back. Zelensky told Xi exactly this. There'll be no peace agreement until we get all our territory back. And the Russians are going to end up taking more territory. And they're not going to give that back either. How do you square that circle? Second big problem is the neutrality problem. The Russians insist that Ukraine be neutral. Right? They've insisted this from the beginning, and their argument is if Ukraine can't be neutral, they're going to wreck it. They're going to wreck it to keep it out of NATO, or if it's in NATO, it'll be ineffective because it's wrecked. Right? The Ukrainians, on the other hand, they don't want neutrality. The Ukrainians, for completely understandable reasons, want a security guarantee from someone. Well, there's the question of who is that someone? The only someone out there is the United States or the West or NATO. And that's not going to happen, right? That's not going to happen in ways that will please the Russians. The Russians will not accept that. So how do you square that circle, right? You don't. Two other quick problems here. One is the hyper-nationalism problem. There's a lot of nationalism in the air before this war started. It's morphed into hyper-nationalism, which means the hatred on both sides is off the charts. It's going to make a peace agreement very difficult. And then the other problem is that a number of leaders have made it clear that they lied to Putin about their commitment to the Minsk agreement. You remember the Minsk agreement, which was formulated in late 2015, was designed to shut down the conflict in the Donbass, and Putin was deeply committed to making the Minsk agreement work because he did not want to invade Ukraine. Angela Merkel, Francois Hollande, Petro Poroshenko, and Zelensky himself have all said they never had any interest in making Minsk work, and all they were doing was buying time to build up Ukraine so it would be in a better position to fight Russia. Trust? There's no trust on the Russian side because of this. So you see, you have a problem involving territory, a problem involving neutrality, hyper-nationalism, and zero trust. You're not going to get a meaningful peace agreement. You're going to get a frozen conflict. Let me conclude by just very briefly saying that what's remarkable about this case is that there were a significant number of people in the United States who argued that expanding NATO was going to lead to disaster. It included people like George Kennan. It included people like the actual Secretary of Defense, Bill Perry, and the actual chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Clinton administration, saying this was a disaster in the making. It included people like Paul Nitze and Jack Matlock, of course. There were a panoply of impressive intellects who said that this was a prescription for disaster. And you know what? They were right. And the end result is we are in this situation where enormous damage has already been done to Ukraine, most importantly, but to the West, to Russia, and to the United States. And with the passage of time, I'm sad to say, it's only going to get worse. But I actually think that what's going on here is that the West is leading Ukraine down the primrose path. And the end result is that Ukraine is going to get wrecked. And I believe that the policy that I'm advocating, which is
neutralizing Ukraine and then building it up economically and getting it out of the competition between Russia on one side and NATO on the other side is the best thing that could happen to the Ukrainians. What we're doing is encouraging the Ukrainians to play tough with the Russians. We're encouraging the Ukrainians to think that they will ultimately become part of the West because we will ultimately defeat Putin and we will ultimately get our way. Time is on our side. And of course, the Ukrainians are playing along with this. And the Ukrainians are almost completely unwilling to compromise with the Russians and instead want to pursue a hardline policy. Well, as I said to you before, if they do that, the end result is that their country is going to be wrecked. And what we're doing is, in effect, encouraging that outcome. I think it would make much more sense for us to work to create a neutral Ukraine. It would be in our interest to bury this crisis as quickly as possible. It certainly would be in Russia's interest to do so. And most importantly, it would be in Ukraine's interest to put an end to the